Entendi. Como isso?
Ela relaciona dança através da genética mais articulada.
Welcome to the Wording Dances podcast, a lecture series by dance artists who have something to say about what they do. I am your host, Carlos Oliveira, and this is a co-production between Victor Cordon Studios and Parasite Association in Lisbon. Wording Dances presents a series of episodes, both in English and Portuguese, where renowned artists from the international contemporary dance scene discuss matters which make of dancing and choreographing an inexhaustible terrain of experimentation, problematization, and thinking. Today we invited Ivana Müller to read to us from a text which she prepared exclusively for this occasion, titled Thoughts on Togetherness. Ivana is a choreographer, artist, and author of texts. Through her choreographic and theater work, she rethinks the politics of spectacle and spectacular, revisits the place of imaginary and imagination, questions the notion of participation, investigates the idea of value and its representation, and keeps on getting inspired by the relationship between performer and spectator. Next to her artistic practice, Ivana Müller curates artistic and discursive encounters and lectures in different contexts. She was born in Zagreb and grew up in Croatia and in Amesterdam, and currently lives in Paris and works internationally. We will now listen to Ivana for about 30 minutes, after which she and I will discuss a bit about the relevance of the commons in times when the far right has been on the rise in the West, as well as about the relationship between individuals and collectives, both in life and in art. So please let yourself tune into the listening and enjoy the words.
This text was written in the period between early May and early July 2024. During this time, some major political and social events happened in Europe, and most specifically in France, the country I live in since more than 15 years. Those events produced more tensions and anxieties and made us all re-question some fundamental questions about democracy, coexistence, about the place of a foreigner, about having personal choices and understanding their impact on the collective. All of this has obviously influenced this text and guided my thinking and my writing about practicing art and choreography in the larger context. It is May 2024. I am sitting at my desk at home in Paris, starting to write this text. Outside, the late spring is slouching on the streets. The window in my room is open. I hear birds, and maybe if you concentrate, you can hear them too. The sweet smell produced by sun, pollution, and pollen is coming inside of the apartment. The feeling of the new beginning that comes as atavism with every new spring tickles those old butterflies in my stomach and brings some form of restlessness. Our collective imagination is occupied by wars, migration crisis, rise of the extreme right, artificial intelligence, and I swear this text is written and read by a human, by climate change, catastrophes. The world is, as always, in a process of transformation, in the perpetual process of change. Except that now, this process feels more dramatic and painful, or maybe faster, more ruthless, more claimed, more irreversible, more violent, more mediatized. It is the time of crisis, And if I think of it, it has been time of crisis for a while now. And I guess one of the important daily fights is never to get used to it, never to let a crisis install itself as a normality. I try to close my eyes. It is difficult because I'm writing, and I try to concentrate. I concentrate on the search for the most important or most urgent thing to write about, to speak about, in relationship with my work and practice and in general. The most urgent thing to think about out loud, here, next to you, or together with you listening. I try different things. It doesn't feel right. So I give myself a limitation. And limitations always work for me. The more the frame is clear, the less I'm allowed to do, the deeper I search. And eventually, if I'm lucky and well concentrated, I can even go beyond the frame. So the limitation I give myself here is that the thing that I'm looking for must be formulated in one word. So I think for a couple of days, maybe weeks, and obviously during that time I'm not sitting at my desk with the window open. I do other things. I take care of my children, I write other texts, I read, I rehearse, I show work, I teach, I meditate, I swim, I travel, but I keep on thinking until I finally get reminded of the deadline and I am obliged, I guess by my feeling of duty and the respect for the engagement I gave, to throw myself into writing. I don't know how you do it, and I ask this because I somehow imagine that all of you listening have some practice in writing or some artistic practice. Otherwise, it would be very unlikely that you are listening to this. So I don't know how you do it, but for me, in order to start working seriously on something, there must be some burden or something that is bothering me, a problem, or at least some sort of fragility. It is never the place of confirming, the place of I know that I depart from, or the place of what kind of freedom. And now I'm mimicking the gesture of brackets as I'm saying the word freedom. It is more the let's figure it out and I have to place that I'm starting the journey from. More generally speaking, I think that artists, poets and philosophers, which in my mind are those who can truly change our ways of seeing and by consequence our ways of being in this world, and which are those that can keep this humanity somehow meaningful and hopeful, they, artists, poets, philosophers, almost always create from the place of fragility, never from the position of power. I guess when someone has the power, I admit I deliberately use he in this sentence, not accompanied by she, which would be more inclusive, because I estimate that the concept of power can easily be related to the paradigms of patriarchy. So when someone has the power, he, by definition, convinces the others that what he has, or what he knows, or what he says, is important and meaningful. And others, in return, believe that, indeed, it is important and meaningful, because one is never powerful alone. And so the one that has the power, to use a physical metaphor, sits on what he has established, what he has acquired, what he has territorialized. He takes a position that offers a fixed point of view, because when you are sitting, you are not moving, and you're not seeing what you are sitting on. You're not looking in different directions. You're mostly looking in one single direction. Power is more about fixing. There is not much movement there. But when you think or act or speak from the place of fragility, from the place of questioning, you are not trying to convince. You are not preaching. You are just guessing. You are intuitively grasping. And since you are not looking for a solution, but you are mostly preoccupied with defining the question, you can take a risk to go far with what you propose. You're not fixing, you're not closing, you're opening, and you can create some form of movement. Movement of thoughts, movement of ideas, movement of relations. And you have to accept that others might potentially find your proposition, this opening that you are creating, unusual or weird or problematic or scary or maybe even idiotic. But that is the risk you must take. One must be strong when going publicly fragile, or at least determined, or maybe even possessed, or shameless. And one must have this sense, this idea, this feeling that this fragility, this intuition, this gesture in becoming, this weirdness must be, for some reason, and maybe always for a different reason, important to share with others. And so maybe speaking of sharing and speaking of others opens up a possibility to finally tell you what was the word or the concept or that thing that I decided to talk about in this spoken text. I chose to concentrate on the idea of common, C-O-M-M-O-N. Common, as you know, can mean many things. It can mean frequent, it can mean shared or widespread, it can mean ordinary or even vulgar. It can mean public or what belongs to a community. Common often comes together with other words like common knowledge or common good or common sense. So I guess the most common understanding of the word common, or its plural form of commons, is the idea of shared resources that are managed and maintained collectively by a community or communities which establish rules to preserve and perpetuate these resources while providing the members of the community with the possibility and the right to use them. It is maybe good to say that those communities are not necessarily only the communities of humans. An ecosystem is a common, and it is a common for all living forms and species that engage in it. Bees have their common, bacteria in your belly, and in mine too, also have their common. Marine creatures, trees and plants, they have their commons as well. The resources that create common can be natural, like a forest or a river or a mountain. They can be material, like machines or tools. A house is a common. A power station is a common. A cultural center is a common. Or they can be immaterial, like a dance or a concept, different forms of knowledge, stories, rituals, social medias. So yeah, I guess this would be the most conventional definition of common. But words and definitions are like dancers. They move and they are permanently adaptable. The common I'm actually interested in and was interested in during the last 20 or more years throughout my life and my practice could be described more as that what holds us together, or maybe even that what we decide to hold together. It is this invisible tissue made out from our collective beliefs, illusions, gestures, out of our shared imagination. It is the matter that we are willing to wrap ourselves in, engage ourselves in, be in it together with others, and through this engagement, eventually create a place or a space that can feed us with questions, with sensations, with hope, with inspiring experiences. Theatre is probably the common, or a common, that I was most inspired by. It's a common shared by communities of performers, technicians, spectators, dramaturgs, directors, designers, each of them having their specific role to play, each of them influencing each other. And together they hold different versions of possible, of imaginable, of utopian, and of real. A body can be a common when shared through dances, through images, through rituals, or when being a resource for all those that live in it, like those bacteria I talked about, but other bodies like a tree also can be a common for different colony of species, for different bugs, for different mushrooms, for different lichens. Together they make the idea of a tree, or the ecosystem of a tree, the common of a tree. A language is a common which is permanently engaging and including all those speaking it, and permanently disengaging and excluding all those who don't. In that sense, a language, being a defined frame shared daily by its entire community of speakers, can give us many possibilities for expressing thoughts, ideas, for creating relations, for creating poetry also, for proposing transgression, for being wild. And at the same time, it carries the cruelty of exclusion, the oppression of rules and grammar, the evidence of social hierarchies when it comes to its spoken versions. A common doesn't happen by itself. In order for it to exist, we have to engage in it. We have to be part of it. We have to fuel it. We have to give in. Even if the prospect of the engagement is not entirely defined, even if the destiny of that engagement is under permanent construction, which can bring us frustration more often than joy. Maybe the common I'm actually interested in and was exploring for a while could be ascribed as a potential which a group of people, an instant community if you prefer, can work on and develop together during a time of a brief encounter. An ephemeral common that is created during the moment of dance or during the moment of theater, an exercise in togetherness. The common that gets created in a moment with the participation of each individual, but can vibrate for a while as the experience of the collective. I guess that one of the reasons why people love dancing is because they dance with others. They engage their energies in something that is larger than their individual or personal sense of moving, or their personal sense of breathing, beyond their personal sense of rhythm. I guess there is something cosmic in it. When we dance, not only our bodies, but also our thoughts are shaking. They are moving. They are being displaced all over our body. They pass from one body to another, and then can go out in the space, and possibly also to the bodies of those who watch us dancing. Through dancing with others, we create connections, and we can go beyond the notion of me into the idea of we. This process can be felt as joyful, illuminating, or even ecstatic. Engaging in a dance with others can also bring many questions. How do I fit in this dance? What am I really sharing? How far am I willing to go or to let go of myself in order to keep my sense of integrity, in order not to lose myself completely in this dance? And if it is not strictly my dance, why do I want to engage in it? And more largely, going from the idea of dance to the idea of choreography, an interesting question could be why we are pertinently engaging with joy, hope, and pleasure in the movements that somebody else made for us, the steps that somebody else designed for us. This idea of sharing the energy with others, breathing with others, moving with others, can possibly develop the sense of solidarity or the feeling of being in solidarity with others. There is the word solid in the word solidarity, probably because doing something together can make us stronger, more reliable, more compact. It can also make us more resistant and more endurant. I think that the most meaningful things in our life we don't do for ourselves. We do them for others, or at least with others. I figured this out some years ago, and it felt like such an obvious thing. For example, I would never have written and spoken this text if I didn't have the idea of you listening to it, which means literally that I couldn't do it without you. And you could never listen to this text if I haven't written it and spoken it, which means literally that you couldn't do it without me either. And neither of us could do it without Carlos Manuel, who kindly asked me to write a text for this podcast before. And so he, in turn, couldn't do it without us. And he also couldn't do it if the podcast series didn't exist already. And so on, and so on, and so on. The things we do for each other, or the things we do with each other, it can be amazing. It can be very creative, very inspiring, very hopeful. Unfortunately, sometimes it is not that obvious. And things that others do to us and with us isn't exactly what we desire, or what we want, or what we find fair or meaningful. That is to say that being part of a common in which you suffer, in which you are not in a good place, happens as well. And this brings a question: what to do if you are a part of a common in which you don't want to be, or in which you have a hard time to express yourself, or in which you don't feel really invited, or in which you don't agree with the rules, or in which you have a hard time to survive, metaphorically or literally. I mean, when the common we are talking about is a dance or a theater play, you can try to change it, to make it better, to influence it. You can simply get out. I mean, the consequences will not be unnotable, but it will not be the end of the world. If you leave, someone will maybe lose a partner, a play will be without an important role player, or it will even have to stop. If you leave as a spectator, the audience will lose a member. But that's okay. I mean, we will ask some questions, we will think, why did you do it? And this will maybe influence our perception of our own engagement into spectating, but it will all go on and no one will die. Or if you are not okay with being part of that common, you can start clapping or booing or shouting, or you can convince others to shout too, or you can form a common within a common with those who feel the same like you. You can also disengage in many different ways. You can also negotiate, you can propose. But if the common is a country or a planet, these options are fortunately not always that effective. So the violence and the suffering is what gets installed, and you are forced to keep with the trouble until you either find a livable solution of staying in it or you simply perish. Therefore, we should do much more theater or other collective arts in general, and much less war, because they teach us, theater and other collective arts, how to be better together. In the meantime, from the moment in May when I started writing with my window open and the sound of birds coming to my room, we arrived at the end of June. The summer has installed itself in the city with the heat, smelling of human sweat, dust and iron. I now keep my window shut with curtains on most of the day. Next to me, the electric fan is sending an occasional breeze that makes the sticky feeling of my hands on the keyboard bearable. We are 4 days before the first round of the general elections in France. There is a lot of tension. It feels like something fundamental on the larger social, political, and intimate level can break or be destroyed in a very violent way in just a couple of days. I'm trying to concentrate on writing, but it is hard. I wonder how can all this thinking about the common and collective be useful in this moment? I'm not finding an answer, and instead, to improve my quality of thinking and also to improve my quality of speaking, I drink a glass of water. I have a Bristol card on the wall next to my desk that says, "Learning is only possible through collective effort." It has been there for a while. I don't remember whether I wrote it as a note to myself or I maybe read it somewhere and noted it as a quote. And if it is from somebody, I don't know from whom it is. So if anyone recognizes it as a quote, please let me know. Thanks. While looking at this sentence, I thought about the fact that all of the works I have ever made were a fruit of a collective effort. They all contain different forms of collective writing. They have been formed during a period of rehearsals in which we worked collectively. They have been performed by a group of colleagues, a group of artists, and most of them also participated in the writing of the work. They have been watched by a collective of spectators who all influenced it in a great way. Doing things with others in the kind of togetherness in which everybody assumes the part they play and the place they are at, and in which everybody takes the responsibility for their own participation and at the same time take care for the entire collective, is for me one of the reasons why I still do what I do. I generally believe that we are smarter when we are many, not only because of the accumulation of our individual wisdoms or our individual experiences, but also because being with many proposes, or almost imposes, processes of negotiation, of engagement in a kind of a collaborative dance through which we can train our communal intelligence, inspire our collective imagination, and traverse rough and unknown lands together in a more fearless and a more daring way. During the process of rehearsing or in the process of making work, there are moments of severe doubts. And those moments are important because they bring you to the place of fragility, to the place of questioning. But they can be unbearable, almost damaging, if one is all alone, because they can be quickly felt as personal doubts or as personal fears, and they can easily become heavy, psychological. But once those doubts are out in the open, once we share them, they become of our common interest. They become public. They become our common. They don't belong only to the sphere of my private thoughts. They're not mine. They are ours. And they stay engaging, philosophical, open, and in the permanent movement.
This was Ivana Müller reading Thoughts on Togetherness, a text which she prepared for this occasion. Thank you so much, Ivana, for the text and the reading. I was particularly captivated by the way in which, in your text, you go from describing where you are and the perception of the surroundings, to then, by closing your eyes, describing the perception of ideas and the way in which you search for something urgent to appear in order to start writing. Can you tell us what you think about method and its importance in your creative processes?
I am always interested in how to embody thinking. So that means like how to actually go through the physical experience or a physical condition, how to think in a certain context. So for me, this is very much, this context is defining also how I will think and what could this produce. And so first thing, like I very, very concretely, I said to myself, half an hour of me talking, this will be like extremely boring, you know? So I was thinking, okay, how can I, and I knew that I'm gonna write about common. So I was thinking like, okay, how can I actually go into a situation of common by proposing something that has almost like radiophonic format. And so something that can include the others in an interesting way. So then I really try to imagine very concretely, like people who are listening to this text, who are these people? Why, how did they came to this podcast? What are they expecting? I don't know. So I was trying to listen to those people. I was imagining them, but I was also listening to them. And I think this gave also some very specific quality in addressing and a certain tone in writing. You see what I mean? And also because, I don't know, there is something, I always try to go from the place of honest questioning. That means like what I'm talking about is actually the process through which I went. Like not exactly, of course. And I think it's very interesting to talk about this process of imagining, the process of relating, the process of thinking, because it's like a journey. And it's almost like you're narrating your journey. You take everybody with you and they go through the journey with you somehow. Basically, these were the starting points that were formally or conceptually guiding me through writing of these texts. And also, I said to myself in the beginning, okay, I will not try to make a point from the beginning. I will try to arrive somewhere. You see what I mean? So it was also quite an intense thing for me. And it wasn't always easy. I mean, you know it yourself, like, I mean, basically it took me 1 month longer than I thought. But I thought, okay, I will not let it go. I will not go to something that is obvious, you know, or something that I know. I will not try to betray what I was saying in the text. I will really try to stay open. And so, yeah, basically this is how I always work and how I always write. Except that when I make stage work or performances, I also collaborate on the journey with others. So it's often a bit more collective writing, but it always goes from a place of a specific physical state or specific embodiment. You know, it's tableau vivant, or it's people are connected with ropes, or they are like in slow motion. What I'm talking about in the text as well, I really need to have limits. I need to find a frame. And only if I have that frame, then I can eventually go beyond. And I think for the listeners, this frame is also quite clear. So it's also like we are playing the game of possible. While the listeners listening to me, I am listening to the listeners. So there is something very playful and, interactive, if you want.
So, how is it that for you, dance and choreography can help us think about the commons today, in particular with regards to the institutional contexts where it occurs, since these are so embedded in a culture of spectacle that tends to alienate and impede the kinds of participation necessary for collective movement and political transformation?
I can maybe talk about what is always working for me is when I try to formalize those questions concretely in the work, in the choreographic work I'm doing. Because unfortunately, I'm not a politician. I am not a person that has a lot of power in terms of changing things on a big scale. But I can maybe, while putting those questions in a format that are very concrete, maybe open up some windows or doors where different hopeful solutions, not even solutions, but spaces can be opened. So now let's see, what can we do with people who dance institutionally, and where is this place of participation in it? Where is this place of spectatorship in it? What are we actually dancing, And I think that's maybe the first question that we have to ask if we want to place this form of expression and the form of getting together in today's context. Actually, the piece Forces of Nature that I presented recently in Almada, it's the last piece I did with seated audience. From there on, I started working with formats which are actually including the audience as part of the choreography, not to say dance. And I think it's very interesting to see what can happen in that context, because it's a context that is already only producible in the circumstances of a physical gathering. You see what I mean? It's not something that you can reproduce on television. It's something that you have to really have the experience of. And I don't know, for me, one of the possible ways to rethink choreography and dancing is this notion of experience, the notion of engaging, the notion of sentient, physical, energetical even. Because I think it's also interesting that we can kind of lean on or believe in the energies that we can do as a group of humans. And through these, let's say, practices or these situations, maybe we can start dancing something else.
You talk about how fragility and not knowing can be a way to counteract power dynamics in collectives, and therefore a condition of possibility for something else to happen, that is, to bring forth not only another kind of politics, but also another kind of aesthetics. Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
As an artist, I think it's almost like your duty to not know. It's almost like part of your practice is to be intuitive, because you go to the grounds that are not known, because you are refreshing or reinventing points of view. So you have to be more connected to this sphere of existing and questioning. If you are a politician, well, if you are entirely intuitive, it will probably not go that well in terms of, these are just different dynamics. And I think we can all actually act from our own place of being active or of what we can do. We cannot solve all those huge, complicated problems, neither through our practice nor alone. I think what we have to be is to be informed. We have to be concentrated. And we have to try to work from our resources, from what we can use. And then we can find commons that we can share potentially with people who are somehow, in terms of artistic practice again, we can share those commons with people who are concentrated or who are also exploring into that, or those who are not, and we are inviting somehow in these processes of thinking. And in that sense, we cannot control also. I think often when I talk and when they ask me, how do you work? And because, do you fix? Do you write everything? What is improvised? What is open? And I first think like I really work a little bit like a sculptor, you find a piece of material, like a piece of stone or a piece of wood, and then you have an idea of you are going to sculpt something into it. But at the same time, this material is actually somehow hinting you what to sculpt. And one has to be open to that. And that means not wanting to take fully control, That makes really something in this synergy, in this space between the hand and the gesture and the material. And for me, that's beautiful and that's worthwhile having artistic practice. Another thing that is really important, I think in the world of control and everything is, being surveyed, governed, checked, like very tight, things are very tight. I think that maybe, another thing to create commons is through ecstasies. Through kind of states of ecstasy. I'm not thinking about literally taking ecstasy. I'm thinking about letting oneself go in some kind of situation in which you are exactly not the responsible person and not the only, you see what I mean? Where there is a kind of common intelligence that is being created and it's not your responsibility. It's giving in and taking. And I think that's why this, let's say, for me, before it was the place of theater, it was a lot about that, It was a lot about this space and this kind of experience. But I don't know, now maybe theater is too institutionalized or too, I don't know. So maybe we have to think about different places of how to construct the new places of gatherings where we can have experiences and we can actually have, let's say, the general trust in each other. And trust enough so that we can let go and that we can somehow learn from this common experience, Something like this is also a very good way to recreate the sense of common.
This was Ivana Müller, to whom I would like to thank the availability to deliver this talk and converse with me. We will soon publish some new installments in this lecture series, so if you wish to know more about the up-and-coming releases, please follow Victor Cordon Studios and Parasita Association on social media, websites and streaming platforms. I would also like to thank you for being there, listening, and I hope you can join us in the following episodes. This is all for today. Thank you so much.
Entendi como isso. Ela dança através da genética mais articulada.